The recording was delivered in an unmarked box, addressed to the newspaper I worked for in Dayton, Ohio. Inside was a cheap digital recorder, covered in a fine grayish dust, and a handwritten note on yellowed paper. She called and answered. At first I thought it was just another of the dozens of hoaxes we received every week, made-up stories, fabricated recordings, internet ravings. But when I pressed the play button, I noticed something different. The tape began with the familiar sound of an old phone line, the low, almost intimate hiss, and then two identical female voices. One was crying. The other said, with the same cadence and hesitation, "James? Why are you calling me?" Then the sound fell silent. A thick, almost physical silence followed by a double breath out of sync, as if echoing from within the microphone itself. I reviewed the audio dozens of times that morning. The background noise was constant, a 60 Hz frequency, the kind of electrical hum emitted by appliances plugged directly into the wall. At second 42, I heard a crackle, the sound of two lines crossing, and then both voices repeated, "Hello," separated by a 0.3 second interval, identical in timbre, rhythm, hesitation. It was impossible they were two different people, but even more impossible was what the caller ID showed. The originating and destination numbers were the same. A call that had originated and arrived at the same device, as if time had doubled and the phone had called itself. Also in the envelope was a newspaper clipping dated September 2019. The headline read, "Ohio woman reports unable to call dead husband's number." The name was Helen Marwick, a 38-year-old Springfield resident. According to the report, Marwick had tried calling the old number of her husband, who had died in a car accident 2 months earlier. The line answered, and the voice on the other end was her own, confused, shaky, asking not to hang up. The local phone company confirmed that the call was recorded, but with inconsistent data. Identical origin and destination, varying duration between reports, as if the system itself couldn't decide how long the event lasted. The next day, I drove to Springfield. It was a small town, the kind that seems forgotten between two interstates. The houses were uniform, the streets wide and quiet. Metal signs displayed family names that had stood in the same place for generations. The air smelled of rain and electrical dust, and the high-tension wires swayed in the wind. At the gas station at the entrance, I asked the attendant if he knew anyone named Marwick. He looked at me for a moment too long, as if trying to remember something he'd rather not say. Then he replied, "You're the second one to ask that this week." The first, he said, had been a government official in a dark suit who didn't give his name and bought only a bottle of water. I followed the address printed on the clipping. The house was simple, white, with windows covered by thick curtains. The flowers in the garden had dried, but they were arranged in a strangely symmetrical pattern, as if someone had tried to recreate a photograph. I rang the doorbell and waited. Nothing. Just the sound of the wind, rustling the branches, and the low hum of the wires. Across the street, a child watched from afar, motionless, holding a blue toy telephone. When I looked back, she was gone. I returned to the car and opened the recorder again. I played the main section, and through my headphones noticed something I'd missed before, a subtle echo after each word. Not an acoustic echo, but a digital one, as if the recording were being made twice in 2 layers of time, slightly out of phase. At the end of the tape, a barely audible phrase emerged, spoken by the second voice. "You shouldn't have answered." Then the sound distorted, as if the file were being corrupted, but the display still showed time running, even without any sound. I took the tape to the newspaper studio, where we had audio analysis equipment. The technician, a methodical man, filtered out the noise frequencies and isolated the voices. Both were from the same person. Same vocal signature, same intonation curve. "It could be digital manipulation," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. However, something was off in the spectrogram. Mirrored peaks. The recording didn't show a continuous line, but 2 symmetrical tracks, like reflections of each other, offset by microseconds. "It's like someone talking to themselves, but at slightly different times," the technician murmured. That night, I dreamed of the phone ringing. A simple, continuous ring, but each repetition slowed slightly, as if the phone were being stretched from within. I woke at 3:34, and the first thing I heard was the faint hum of my phone charger. A blue light flashed. The screen showed a missed call, an unknown number, but the prefix was the same as the one on the tape. And strangest of all, the call history indicated the call had come from my own number. In the morning, I decided to return to Springfield. On the way, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The highway signs seemed out of place in relation to the landscape. One sign indicated Exit 17, Springfield, but the GPS showed Exit 18. The difference was slight but constant. It felt like the city was sliding a few feet to the side with each blink. The car radio picked up only static, interspersed with brief snippets of female voices, always the same phrase, "Don't answer." When I arrived back at the address, I found a woman standing on the porch. Her brown hair was tied back, her eyes blank. I asked, "Are you Helen Marwick?" She hesitated before answering, as if she had to remember. "It depends which Helen you're looking for." And then, from inside the house, I heard the phone ring. An ancient, deep sound, vibrating for too long, echoing for seconds that felt elastic. It was then that I realized I wasn't just following a story. I was joining it, and the phone was still ringing, even after the wind had died down. Helen Marwick lived in a 2-story house on the outskirts of Springfield, Ohio, on one of those streets so perfectly symmetrical they resembled model cars. The windows were always closed, curtains blocking the soft light of autumn afternoons. Neighbors described her as a quiet, polite woman, the recent widow of a traffic engineer named James. Since the accident, she had spent most of her time upstairs, organizing papers, reviewing old photos, and, according to reports, calling numbers that no longer existed. The calls began weeks before the incident, always at the same time, 9:47 p.m. They always ended abruptly, with the sound of metallic breathing and the familiar hum of old analog lines. Her routine seemed carefully planned. At 7, black coffee. At 8, reading the local paper. At 9, she went upstairs. In the diary found after the incident, there were short, emotionless entries, almost like technical records. The kitchen clock is 4 minutes fast. The shadow on the streetlight shifted today. The voice on the TV was half a second late. There was no hint of madness in these sentences, just precise clinical observation, as if she were cataloguing small flaws in reality. A neighbor, Mrs. Collins, commented that she sometimes saw Helen standing on the porch, staring blankly at the sky, muttering something about broken time. Her husband, James, had died in a freak accident. According to the police report, his car crashed into a guardrail on a straight road, under clear skies and dry pavement. The speedometer stuck at exactly 47 miles per hour. The dashboard clock stopped at 9:47. At the same time, according to phone records, Helen received a short, 3-second call. When she answered, she heard only her own voice saying, "Don't leave now." The call was traced. It originated from James's phone, which had been destroyed in the impact. Authorities classified the case as a technical anomaly, but the report was shelved under government restrictions. When I started piecing together Helen's routine, something felt off. Street cameras showed her leaving home at 8:32 a.m. on a Wednesday, driving a blue car. But witnesses swore they spoke to her at 8:45 a.m. the same day, still at home, hanging laundry. That's the same woman in 2 different places, 13 minutes apart. The police dismissed it as a timestamp error, but the sun's angle in the photos told a different story. Then the mailman mentioned something strange. Her mail? Sometimes it arrived twice. Identical letters, same postmark, delivered on different days. Some had different creases, as if rewritten. Most were junk mail, but one caught my eye. A phone company pamphlet from 1996 printed on new paper. The mailman swore the address was right, but the house in the photo. It was Helen's own house, 23 years before it was even built. In the basement, police found a makeshift office, old tape recorders, cassettes, a modified rotary phone with soldered wires and date labels. The tapes were numbered, L1947, L2947, L3947, all marked with the same time on different days. Each tape was filled with white noise, and then distant voices calling her name. sometimes two voices. On one tape I heard a quiet, muffled laugh, followed by Helen herself asking, "Am I the one listening or the one being listened to?" The house itself felt wrong. The living room lamp flickered in a perfect 47-second rhythm. The reflections in the framed photos on the wall were delayed. You'd move, and the image in the glass would take a moment to catch up. The wall clock ticked like it was breathing, and the telephone, even unplugged, you could still hear a faint ring deep inside the walls, an insistent electric echo. I took the recordings to a telecommunications professor at Wright State University. What he told me was chilling. He said the electrical signature on the tapes didn't belong to an active circuit. It was like an echo from a former line, a frequency fossil, he called it. But even he couldn't explain how the voices responded in real time. He said, if this is authentic, then the phone wasn't replaying the past, it was connecting to it. But there was one detail no one else caught. A continuous, barely audible tone on the tapes, identical to old microwave interference. A frequency that vanished from modern networks back in 2004. The sound had traveled through time. I compared it to recordings of line noise from the 90s. The pattern matched perfectly. Helen was getting calls from a circuit that hadn't existed for 15 years. In the weeks leading up to the end, Helen became a recluse. Her energy bills doubled. A technician found 2 meter boxes at her address, each with different readings but identical timestamps. When he asked her about it, she just said, "Maybe one of them is for the other house." He thought she was joking. Days later, the second meter was gone, leaving only a perfect rust circle on the wall. Then on September 12th at 9:47 p.m., she made the final call. Street cameras caught the neighborhood lights flickering in sequence, like a power surge in reverse. The call lasted exactly 3 minutes and 19 seconds. When technicians traced it, the system showed an impossible date. September 12th, 2018, a full year in the past. The recording had traveled back in time, and the tape I received months later proved it. One of the voices was hers, the other was also hers. That's when I knew this wasn't about fraud or hysteria. I was investigating something that breaks reality. The most unsettling part? As I listened to those tapes, I felt like I was starting to recognize her, as if Helen's voice was hearing me too. After my second trip to Springfield, things started happening to me. Small, strange anomalies. The clock in my car would slip a few minutes every time I started it. My voicemails had faint echoes, like they were recorded in a metal tunnel. I blamed it on exhaustion, but one morning I opened my laptop and found a new file in my recordings folder. Title, Helen Respond to MP3. The creation date was from 2018. I had never downloaded it. I played the audio. White noise, then a woman's voice saying my name. Not a question, but like she was testing the connection. "David, can you hear me?" Impossible. No one in this case knew my name. I slammed the laptop shut. When I opened it again, the file was gone. No trace in the history, just a string of zeros where its name used to be, as if it was deleted before it ever existed. I started checking my notes. There were duplicate pages, in my own handwriting, but with slight differences. Sentences were mixed up, words I don't remember writing. In one entry, I described interviewing Helen, an interview that never happened. It read, "She knew I was coming. She said the call never stopped, it just changed direction." I closed the notebook. The ink was still fresh. I tried talking to my editor, but he had no memory of the story. He said I never brought him any recordings, that the paper never published anything about a Helen Marwick. My emails about the case were blank, empty body, no attachments. "Maybe you confused it with another story," he said. But as he spoke, his reflection in the glass behind him moved a second too late. I began to avoid mirrors, not because I was scared of what I'd see, but because of the tiny differences. The light would flicker at a different rhythm. I'd catch myself blinking out of sync with my own reflection. One day I glanced over and saw a silhouette standing behind my reflection, motionless and out of focus. I spun around. The office was empty. The light blinked 3 times, then steadied. I looked back, and my reflection stared at me for a long moment before mimicking my movement. The recording started to multiply. New files appeared on my computer, all named L47XX. The content was my own voice describing places I hadn't been to yet. I'm in front of her house, the porch light is on. I think I hear 2 breaths. It was my voice, my exhaustion, but the background noise, the wind, the footsteps, they were from the future. This story, it isn't over. It feels like it's just beginning, and I'm no longer just the one telling it. I think I'm becoming a part of it. The question is, which part? The one listening or the one being listened to? Thanks for watching. If you want to follow where this leads, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. I have a feeling things are about to get even stranger. One night I'm hunched over these case files and my phone rings. The number, I knew it instantly. Springfield area code, and the last 4 digits, the same as Helen Marwick's original call. My heart pounded as I answered. Nothing, just a wall of static. Then, a faint, shallow breath, exactly like the one I'd heard on the tapes. I said my name into the void. A few seconds crawled by, and then the reply came, in that same eerie, breathless tone. It's me. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering onto the floor. The call stayed connected and the clock on the screen froze. 9:47. When the line finally went dead, I looked up. The old clock in my living room. Its hands had stopped, pointing to the exact same time. The next few days were a blur of denial and sleepless nights. I went over everything, trying to piece it all together. But every time I reviewed my notes, something was different. A date, the color of a car, some tiny, insignificant detail had changed. The photos I took of Helen's house were the worst. In one, the sky was a grim, overcast gray. In another, it was a brilliant blue, but the metadata on both files claimed they were taken in the exact same minute. I showed the pictures to a friend in tech. He just laughed it off. Maybe your camera's internal clock is fried, he said. Or, he joked, you're living 2 versions of the same minute. We both chuckled, but the thought stuck with me, a cold knot in my stomach. Later, while reviewing the audio files again, I noticed something new in the most recent recordings. Faint noises in the background, like footsteps. I amplified the sound, leaning closer to my speakers. And there it was. The soft click of a pen, the creak of a chair. The sound of someone breathing way too close to the microphone. But the detail that made my blood run cold was at the very end of the file, the distinct sound of a keyboard typing. It was the exact sequence of keys I was pressing at that very moment. I slammed my laptop shut. For a split second, the dark screen reflected my face, illuminated by the blue glow of my monitor. Except, the reflection's mouth moved before mine did. The evidence was piling up, and the line between what I was investigating and what I was experiencing began to dissolve. It felt like Helen's tapes weren't just recordings anymore. They were a phenomenon, and it was expanding, growing stronger the closer I got. Some nights, I'd hear a phone ringing from inside the walls of my apartment. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, but it was constant. I'd press my ear against the outlets, the cracks in the plaster, the floorboards, trying to find the source. It was always the same ring, repeating at precise 47-second intervals. The last night of that week, I dreamed of Helen again. She was standing in a room with no windows, holding an old rotary phone. The cord was coiled around her arm like a metal snake. When she tried to speak, her voice split in 2. One voice asked, "Are you recording?" The other whispered back, "No, you are." Then the sound just dissolved, and the room began to shrink, as if space itself was being rewound. I woke up with a jolt, my own phone vibrating on the nightstand. It was 9:47 a.m., and flashing on the screen was my own number calling itself. I had to dig deeper. I used my press credentials to access federal databases, specifically archived telecommunications records from 2018 to 2020. At first, it was all standard stuff. But then I entered Helen Marwick's number. The system returned a message I'd never seen before. Duplicate record detected. The phone line was listed twice, each with slight variations. One record was from Springfield, as expected. The other was linked to an address in Dayton. My address. It made no sense. 2 active connections for the same number shouldn't be possible. It was like one was a mirror image of the other, running in parallel. I sent a discreet inquiry to the tech support department, masking it as academic research. The reply came 2 days later. The technician insisted there was no system error, but he included a chilling warning. The number you queried is linked to confidential investigations. Do not attempt to trace it. Attached to the email was a file, sigma47.pdf. It was corrupted, but I managed to force it open long enough to read a single line from the header before it froze. Reverse Temporal Communication Project, Marwick Subdivision. I drove back to Helen's house. It was empty, a for sale sign stuck in the overgrown lawn. Inside, on the dusty floor of her office, I could still see the circular marks where equipment had once stood. A small piece of tape was stuck to the wall, and on it, a number was written in black ink, 947. I started taking photos, but when I reviewed them back in the car, I saw something impossible. In 2 of the images, a silhouette was standing behind the window. It was tall, motionless, and its features were identical to mine. In the reflection on the glass, the sky outside was a different color in each shot, the light from a different time of day. But the metadata for both photos was stamped with the exact same second. When I got back to my apartment, things felt off. The furniture seemed to have shifted by inches, as if someone had moved everything and then tried to put it back exactly where it was. On the wall, a round, clean circle in the dust showed where a picture had been taken down and then replaced. My digital clock was flashing 9:47. I reset it, but it just went back. I even took the batteries out, but the display stayed lit for a few seconds, showing a strange symbol. 2 crossed horizontal lines like a pause icon. Then it went dark. That night, an email from an anonymous address landed in my inbox. The subject was simple. Have you called yourself? The body of the message contained a single audio file. My hand trembled as I clicked play. I heard my own voice, narrating exactly what I was doing in real time. Every sound, every breath, repeated just seconds before I made it. You're listening now, my recorded voice said, but it's not the first time. I lunged for the computer, but the sound didn't stop. It was coming from my landline now, even though the cord was unplugged. The static grew louder, and for a moment I heard another breath. It sounded like mine. The next day I went to see an old colleague from university, an expert in acoustics. I played him the recordings. He listened in complete silence for almost an hour, his face growing paler by the minute. That's not an echo, he finally said, his voice shaking slightly. It's 2 identical channels separated by microseconds. Technically, that only happens when the same signal travels 2 different paths, or when it comes from 2 different temporal sources. He paused, then looked me dead in the eye. If I didn't know better, I'd say you're receiving the transmission before it's even been broadcast. I begged him to run a spectral comparison between my voice and the voice on Helen S. tapes. The results came back, 100% correspondence. It was impossible. Her voice had the exact same sonic signature as mine, just shifted to a different frequency, like it was being played on a recorder with a slightly different speed. Could it be a software glitch? I asked, desperate for a rational explanation. He just shook his head. Either this is an impossible statistical coincidence, he said, taking a deep breath, or you're the same voice, recorded at 2 different points in time. That afternoon, my computer started acting on its own. As I was typing up my notes, the cursor began to move, spelling out words I recognized instantly. She was never the origin. The letters appeared with a slight lag, as if someone was typing from somewhere else, or some when else. I yanked the Ethernet cable from the wall, but the words kept appearing, forming one final sentence. Look at the reflection, not the image. I stared at the blank screen, at my own face staring back at me. But my reflection blinked a fraction of a second slower than I did. I spent that night just watching the city lights from my window, feeling like I was losing my mind. The cars below seemed to pass in the same repeating sequence. At exactly 9:47, a distant train horn blew, and all the streetlights on my block flickered at once. I felt a strange electric chill crawl up my spine. When I glanced at my clock, the hands were spinning backward, finally locking onto that number that was haunting me. The next morning, Helen's number called again, I answered automatically. There was a long silence and then a voice, my voice, spoke. "You're recording this, aren't you?" Before I could even form a response, it added, "It doesn't matter. Everything you record has already been said, you're just repeating it." The line went dead, and the recorder on my desk clicked on all by itself. The little red light was blinking, but the display showed something that couldn't be real. The recording date was for the next day. It was as if the tape already knew what I was about to say, and in that moment I understood. The voices, the echoes, the loops, they weren't messages from the past. They were echoes of the future, projected backward. Answers sent to a point in time that hadn't happened yet. And somehow, I was next in line. The days began to repeat themselves in small ways. A glass of water on my desk would suddenly be full again. An email I swore I'd replied to would reappear as unread. I started to feel like the world had lost its causal sense. Causes were coming after their effects. It was like watching reality forget how to function. Everything converged on 9:47. It's a mystery that has completely consumed me, a puzzle where I might not just be the investigator, but also the ghost. Thank you for joining me on this descent into the strange and unexplained. If you've ever experienced something you can't explain, let me know in the comments. And if you want to follow this investigation, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. Sound of a single slow keystroke followed by a faint electronic hum. I record this, knowing I may have recorded it before. Each keystroke sounds familiar, as if my hands are just repeating a pattern learned from someone else. The clock in front of me reads 9:47 a.m. It hasn't moved in days, or maybe time has just stopped moving around it. The air has that same electric hum, like an old power line, as if reality is still trying to reconnect a forgotten circuit. I glance at the recorder on the table. The little red LED is on, but the display is blank. Still, it records. I can feel its heat pulsing, a mechanical beat that's somehow synchronized with my own. Helen's voice, my voice, won't leave me. It slips into the gaps between noises, in the hiss of the radio, in the echoes from the lamps. Sometimes she speaks right before I can think. Other times she repeats what I just said, but with these tiny alterations, like she's testing out different versions of the same phrase. "You are the noise," she says. "The world needs the noise to go on." I try to respond, but I realize the recording already has my answer. I'm just a repetition, a recording stuck in a continuous loop, the sound of someone trying to explain something that never happened. Reviewing the files, I find a sequence hidden deep within the layers of noise, fragments of a voice spaced exactly 47 seconds apart. Each one starts with a crackle of energy, and each ends with the sound of my own breathing, but recorded from different angles, as if dozens of me were watching at once. When I synchronize all the tracks, the sounds combine, forming a single continuous vibration that sharpens into a word. Fix. The computer crashes. The file vanishes. But the echo of that word, it's still here, suspended in the air, vibrating in the bones of the building. The walls have started to breathe. I don't mean that metaphorically. They are actually breathing. They expand and contract like giant concrete lungs. Cold air flows in and out through the cracks, carrying the smell of dust and static. I try to leave, but the door is locked, and behind it, there's no corridor. It's just the same room, reflected infinitely, each reflection slightly different. In one, the mug on my table is full. In another, it's empty. In a third, it's spilled. Every time I step through the door, I just advance to another version of the exact same moment. Time isn't a line anymore. It's become a space I just traverse in circles. Then I find it. A new folder on my computer. Sigma Archive Helen. Inside, hundreds of numbered audio recordings, all named after my voice. I play them, and I hear different versions of myself, all narrating the same story, but with these subtle variations. In one, I'm the reporter. In another, I'm the dead husband. In another, the sound technician. In some, I'm Helen herself, trying to convince someone she's still alive. Every single recording ends the same way. The call isn't over. That's when I understand. The project was never about communicating with the past. It was about perpetuating the present, about trying to fix an unstable reality through endless repetition. Then the telephone rings. Not my modern one, but the deep metallic ring of an ancient line. It's coming from inside the walls, from the cables, maybe from matter itself. The sound calls to me, measured, hypnotic. I answer without even thinking. The line is just breathing, not human but electric, like the universe itself is exhaling. A voice speaks softly, almost a whisper. Are you ready for the final correction? I try to answer, but I realize the question was already asked, a long, long time ago. The voice continues. The recording must end, and for that, the recorder needs silence. I look at the device on the table. The red light is still flashing, but now I see it. Each flash happens a second before the sound it's supposed to be recording. Time is reversing inside the machine. I remember what Helen, or I, said at the beginning. She called and answered. Maybe this is where it all started. With me trying to understand something I'd already done. I called, I answered. The call was never between two people. It was between two versions of the same moment, trying to align. Reality was just the space between one hello and the next. The sound starts to distort. The air compresses. The lights vibrate at the same frequency as the noise on the tapes. The walls flicker between different versions of the room. Empty, full, destroyed, reconstructed. In one version, I see my own body standing perfectly still, just watching the recorder like a living photograph. In another, I'm just a projected shadow. Everything is happening at once. There is no before or after. I try to turn the device off, but the record button is stuck. The display flashes on for just a second, showing a single line of text. Cycle complete. Instance replaced. And then, silence. Absolute silence. No noise, no hiss, just perfectly still air. I look around. Everything is fixed, like a frozen image. The room, the recorder, the clock, all suspended. I try to breathe, but even the sound of the air seems frozen. In the center of the table, the recorder still glows. The tape spins slowly, winding backward, rewinding time itself. The last words I hear don't come from me or Helen or anyone. It's a neutral, distant voice, maybe the system itself, whispering, anomaly stabilized, instance closed. Then the lights go out. For a brief moment, there is nothing. When I can see again, I'm sitting at the same table, same recorder, same mug. Only the name on the tag across my chest has changed. Now it says H. Marwick. I hear a phone ring out of nowhere. The sound echoes slow, resonating inside my head. I reach out, my hand hesitant, and I answer. On the other end, my own voice asks calmly, James, why are you calling me? The tape ends before I even hit record. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If you enjoy stories that explore the strange and unsettling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It means the world to me. See you in the next one. I record this, knowing I may have recorded it before. Each keystroke sounds familiar, as if my hands are repeating a pattern learned from another. The clock in front of me reads 9:47 a.m. and hasn't moved in days, or perhaps it's time that has ceased to exist around it. The air has the same electric hum of an old power line, as if reality is still trying to reconnect a forgotten circuit. I glance at the recorder on the table. The red LED is on, but the display is blank. Still, it records. I feel the heat of the device pulsing, a mechanical beat synchronized with my own. Helen's voice, my voice, won't leave me. It appears in the gaps between noises, in the hiss of the radio, in the echoes of the lamps. Sometimes she speaks before I can think. Other times she repeats what I just said, but with slight alterations, as if testing out alternative versions of the same phrases. You are the noise, she says. The world needs the noise to go on. I try to respond, but realize the recording already contains my answer. I'm just a repetition. A recording in a continuous loop. The sound of someone trying to explain something that never happened. Reviewing all the files, I find a sequence hidden among the layers of noise. Fragments of voice, spaced perfectly 47 seconds apart. Each begins with a crackle of energy. and each ends with my own breathing recorded from different angles, as if dozens of me were watching at once. When I synchronize all the tracks, the sum forms a single continuous sound, a vibration that transforms into the word fix. The computer crashes. The file disappears. But the echo of the word remains suspended in the air, vibrating in the bones of the building. The walls have begun to breathe. Not metaphorically, they actually do. They expand and contract like concrete lungs. Cold air flows in and out through the gaps, carrying the smell of dust and static. I try to leave, but the door is locked, and behind it there is no longer a corridor, just the same room, reflected infinitely, slightly different with each iteration. In one, the mug on the table is full, in another empty, in another spilled. Each time I pass through the door, I advance only to another version of the same moment. Time is no longer a line. It has become a space I traverse in circles. I discover a new folder on my computer. Sigma, Archive, Helen. Inside, hundreds of numbered audio recordings, all named after my voice. When I play them, I hear different versions of myself narrating the same story, but with subtle variations. In one, I'm the reporter. In another, the dead husband. In another, the sound technician. In some, I'm Helen herself trying to convince someone she's alive. Each recording ends the same way. The call isn't over. I realize then that the project never sought to communicate with the past. It sought to perpetuate the present, to fix an unstable reality through endless repetition. The telephone rings again, not the modern one, but the deep, metallic ring of an ancient line. It comes from within the walls, from the cables, perhaps from matter itself. The sound calls to me, measured, hypnotic. I answer without thinking. The line emits only breathing, not human but electric, as if the universe itself were exhaling. A voice speaks softly, almost a whisper. "Are you ready for the final correction?" I try to answer, but realize the question was already asked long ago. The voice continues. The recording must end, and for that the recorder needs silence. I look at the device on the table. The red light still flashes, but now I realize that each flash occurs a second before the accompanying sound. Time is reversing within the recording. I remember Helen's, or my, phrase at the beginning. She called and answered. Maybe it all started here, with me trying to understand what I had already done. I called. I answered. The call was never between two people. It was between two versions of the same moment trying to align. Reality was just the space between one hello and the next. The sound begins to distort. The air compresses. The lights vibrate at a frequency identical to the tape's noise. The walls flicker between different versions of the room, empty, full, destroyed, reconstructed. In one, I see my body standing still, watching the recorder, still like a living photograph. In another, I'm just a projected shadow. Everything happens at once, with no before or after. I try to turn off the device, but the record button is stuck in place. The display lights up for a second, showing a single line of text. Cycle complete, instance replaced. Suddenly, silence. No noise, no hiss, just still air. I look around, everything is fixed like a frozen image. The room, the recorder, the clock, everything is still, suspended. I try to breathe, but even the sound of the air seems frozen. In the center of the table, the recorder still glows. The tape spins slowly, winding backward, rewinding time. The last words I hear don't come from me or Helen or anyone else. A neutral, distant voice, perhaps that of the system itself, whispers, "Anomaly stabilized, instance closed." Then something happens. The lights go out. For a brief moment, everything is absent. When I see again, I'm sitting at the same table, the same recorder, the same mug. Only the name on the name tag across my chest has changed. Now it says H. Marwick. I hear a phone ring out of nowhere. The sound echoes, slow, resonating inside my head. I reach out, hesitant, and answer. On the other end, my voice asks calmly, "James? Why are you calling me?" The tape ends before I even hit record.